Eleanor Keller's hands trembled as the dying cowboy gripped her wrist and whispered, "One night together, that's all I ask." His blue eyes burning with a final desperate plea that would haunt her for years to come. That single night with a stranger facing death would transform Eleanor from a doctor's uncertain daughter into a woman with healing hands, and eventually lead her to the one man who understood exactly why she couldn't refuse a dying man's last request. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The summer heat shimmered across the vast Montana prairie as Dr. Thomas Keller's wagon rattled down the dusty road toward the Blackwood Ranch. His daughter Eleanor sat beside him, her medical bag clutched tightly in her lap. At 26, Eleanor had spent the past 4 years shadowing her father, learning the healing arts that formal medical schools still refuse to teach women. Today would be her first time treating a patient alone, a ranch hand who'd taken a bullet during a cattle rustling attempt 2 days prior. "Remember, Ellie," her father said, his voice gravelly from years of shouting over prairie winds to be heard at patients' bedsides, "infection is our greatest enemy out here. Clean the wound thoroughly, even if he fights you on it." Eleanor nodded, her throat tight. She had assisted with bullet wounds before, but never one that had festered for days. "What if I can't save him?" Dr. Keller's weathered face softened. "Then you make him comfortable. That's all any doctor can do when death comes calling." The Blackwood Ranch appeared on the horizon, a sprawling collection of buildings nestled against the backdrop of distant mountains. As they drew closer, Eleanor could make out the main house, the bunkhouse, and several barns. A tall figure emerged from the main house, and even from a distance, Eleanor recognized Matthew Blackwood, the ranch owner, by his distinctive gait and broad shoulders. "Thomas," Blackwood called as the wagon rolled to a stop, "thank God you've come. He's taken a turn for the worse." "This is my daughter Eleanor," Dr. Keller said, helping her down from the wagon. "She'll be treating your man today." Blackwood's expression darkened. "No disrespect to your daughter, Thomas, but I was expecting you to handle this. Jackson's one of my best hands. I can't lose him to a woman's inexperience." Eleanor felt her cheeks flush, but before she could respond, her father spoke. "My daughter has more skill in her little finger than most army surgeons have in their entire bodies. She'll treat your man, or we'll both leave." After a tense moment, Blackwood nodded curtly. "He's in the north cabin. We moved him there to keep the infection from spreading to the other men." As they walked toward the cabin, Eleanor steadied her breathing. She would not allow this man's doubt to shake her confidence. She had earned her knowledge through years of study and practice, even if society refused to acknowledge it with a formal degree. The cabin was small but clean, with a single bed against the far wall. On it lay a man whose face was flushed with fever, his breathing labored. Eleanor approached, setting her medical bag on the small table beside the bed. "Jackson," Blackwood said, his voice unusually gentle. "The doctor's here." The man's eyes fluttered open, revealing irises the color of a summer sky. Despite the fever's glaze, they focused on Eleanor with surprising clarity. "You're not the doctor," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm Dr. Keller's daughter," Eleanor replied, removing her gloves and placing a cool hand against his forehead. The heat radiating from his skin confirmed her fears. The infection had taken firm hold. "I'm here to help you." Jackson's gaze held hers for a long moment before he gave a slight nod. "If the old doc trusts you, that's good enough for me." Eleanor worked methodically, cutting away the bandages to reveal an angry red wound on Jackson's left side, just below his ribs. The bullet had gone clean through, but the entry and exit wounds were both swollen and seeping. She cleaned the area, fighting to keep her expression neutral despite the severity of the infection. "How bad is it, Doc?" Jackson asked, his eyes never leaving her face. Eleanor considered lying, offering false reassurance as she had seen other doctors do. But something in those clear blue eyes demanded honesty. "It's bad," she admitted. "The infection has spread. I'll do everything I can, but you need to prepare yourself." A ghost of a smile touched his cracked lips. "Appreciate the truth. Not many would give it." She worked through the afternoon and into the evening, cleaning the wound, applying poultices, and administering what medicines she had. Her father checked in periodically, but mostly left her to work alone, his silent vote of confidence bolstering her resolve. As night fell, Jackson's fever rose. Eleanor bathed his face and chest with cool water, watching helplessly as the infection tightened its grip. In lucid moments, he told her fragments of his life, growing up on a small farm in Kansas, learning to ride almost before he could walk, drifting west after his parents died of influenza, finding a home of sorts at the Blackwood Ranch. "Never thought I'd die in bed," he said during one clear moment as Eleanor changed the poultice. "Always figured it would be a fall from a horse or a bullet in a fair fight." "You're not dying tonight," Eleanor insisted, though the certainty in her voice rang hollow even to her own ears. Jackson caught her wrist, his grip surprisingly strong for a man so ill. "One night together," he said, his eyes suddenly intense. "That's all I ask." Eleanor froze, unsure if she'd heard him correctly. "Mr. Jackson, the fever—" "Not like that," he said, a faint smile playing at his lips despite the pain. "Just stay with me. Talk to me. Let me pretend, just for tonight, that I'm not dying alone in this God-forsaken cabin." Something in his voice, the raw honesty, the quiet dignity, touched Eleanor deeply. She sat beside him on the bed, her hand finding his. "I'm not going anywhere." As the night deepened, Jackson's fever worsened. He drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes recognizing Eleanor, sometimes calling her by other names: Sarah, Mother, Mary. During one moment of clarity, he looked at her with such tenderness that Eleanor felt her heart constrict. "In another life," he whispered, "I would have courted you properly, brought you wildflowers, and taken you riding at sunset." Eleanor found herself imagining that other life, one where she wasn't the eccentric doctor's daughter, where he wasn't a dying cowboy, one where they might have had a chance. "I would have liked that," she admitted softly. Near dawn, Jackson's breathing became more labored. Eleanor knew the end was near. She held his hand tightly, willing her strength into him, though she knew medicine didn't work that way. "Eleanor," he said suddenly, his voice stronger than it had been for hours. "Promise me something." "Anything," she replied, surprised to find tears stinging her eyes. "Live boldly. Don't let them tell you what you can't do." His eyes, clear and earnest, held hers. "You're a fine doctor, better than most men I've known." Eleanor nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. "And when you think of me," he continued, "remember tonight. Not the fever or the pain, just this. Two people who might have been something to each other given the chance." As the first light of dawn crept through the cabin window, Jackson's breathing slowed, then stopped altogether. Eleanor sat motionless, still holding his hand, watching as the golden sunlight illuminated his face, peaceful now in death. When her father found her an hour later, she was still sitting there, her medical bag packed, her face composed. "You did all you could," Dr. Keller said gently. Eleanor nodded, rising from the bed. "It wasn't enough." "It never is," her father replied. "That's the first lesson every doctor learns." As they left the cabin, Eleanor looked back at the still figure on the bed. One night together, that's all he had asked for. One night of connection, of not being alone at the end. She couldn't have saved him. The rational part of her knew that, but she had given him what he truly needed in those final hours, and somehow he had given her something too, a reminder of why she had chosen this path, despite all the obstacles society placed before her. "Ready to go home?" her father asked, waiting by the wagon. Eleanor took a deep breath of the crisp morning air. "No," she said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "I'm ready to become a doctor." 5 years had passed since that fateful night at Blackwood Ranch, yet Eleanor could still recall every detail with perfect clarity. The smell of pine from the cabin walls, the flickering shadows cast by the oil lamp, the surprising strength in Jackson's grip as he'd made his final request. One night together, a simple plea that had altered the course of her life. The years following Jackson's death had been a whirlwind of determination and struggle. Eleanor had convinced her father to send her east to Philadelphia, where a small women's medical college had reluctantly admitted her. The male professors had been dismissive, the male students cruel, but Eleanor had persevered, drawing strength from the memory of a dying cowboy who believed in her skill when no one else would. Now, as the train rattled westward, carrying her back to Montana Territory, Dr. Eleanor Keller clutched her hard-won medical diploma and stared out at the passing landscape. The rolling prairies and distant mountains were a welcome sight after the crowded streets of Philadelphia. She was coming home, not as a doctor's daughter, but as a doctor in her own right. Her father had written that much had changed in Ridgewater during her absence. A proper hospital had been built, small but well-equipped, and they desperately needed another physician. The town had grown with the railroad's expansion, bringing more families, more accidents, more illnesses. Dr. Thomas Keller was no longer young, and his hands had begun to shake when performing delicate procedures. The train whistle pierced the afternoon quiet as they approached Ridgewater Station. Eleanor gathered her belongings, smoothing the wrinkles from her traveling dress. She had worn her finest clothes for the journey home, wanting to look every inch the professional she had fought so hard to become. As the train slowed to a stop, Eleanor caught sight of her father waiting on the platform, looking older and more frail than she remembered. Beside him stood Sheriff Mills and Mayor Bennett, both of whom had known Eleanor since childhood. Their presence was a testament to how much her homecoming meant to the small community. "Ellie!" her father called, arms outstretched as she descended from the train. "Or should I say, Dr. Keller?" Eleanor embraced him tightly, breathing in the familiar scent of pipe tobacco and antiseptic that had defined her childhood. "I've missed you, Father." The journey to their home passed quickly, filled with stories of town developments and news of families Eleanor had known. The new hospital was the pride of Ridgewater, Mayor Bennett explained, built with donations from all the major ranches in the area, including a substantial sum from the Blackwood Ranch. "Speaking of Blackwood," Sheriff Mills said, "did you hear about Matthew's brother taking over the ranch?" Eleanor shook her head. Matthew Blackwood had been the owner when Jackson died. "Matthew passed 2 winters ago," her father explained gently. "Pneumonia. I did what I could, but..." He trailed off, the shared understanding between physicians requiring no further explanation. His younger brother Caleb returned from Texas to take over, Mayor Bennett continued. "Different sort altogether. Educated back east before trying his hand at ranching in Texas. He's transformed that place, introduced new breeding stock, modern methods. And he's not one to hold with outdated notions," Sheriff Mills added with a meaningful glance at Eleanor. "Hired a female bookkeeper last year, caused quite a stir." Eleanor understood the implication. In Caleb Blackwood, she might find an ally in her quest to establish herself as a physician in her own right. The Keller home looked exactly as she remembered, a modest 2-story structure with a small office attached to one side. Eleanor's mother had died when she was just 10, and her father had raised her alone, bringing her along on house calls and gradually teaching her the healing arts. Every corner of the house held memories of her apprenticeship. "I've had your old room prepared," her father said as they entered. "Though I thought you might prefer to take the guest room at the back of the house. It's larger, with space for your books and equipment." "My old room will be fine," Eleanor assured him. "I don't need much space." That evening, after unpacking her belongings and sharing a quiet dinner with her father, Eleanor sat on the porch, watching as twilight settled over Ridgewater. Tomorrow she would visit the new hospital, begin establishing herself as Dr. Eleanor Keller. She knew there would be resistance. There always was when a woman stepped beyond her proper place. But she was prepared for the battle. "You should get some rest," her father said, joining her on the porch. "Your first day will be challenging enough without exhaustion clouding your judgment." Eleanor smiled. "You taught me well. A tired doctor is a dangerous doctor." He chuckled, settling into the chair beside her. "I've arranged for you to meet with the hospital board tomorrow. Most are reasonable men, but Dr. Hargrove will be difficult." "I expected as much." The letters he sent in response to my application made his views quite clear. "Just remember what I taught you," Dr. Keller said, his voice taking on the instructional tone she knew so well. "In medicine, results speak louder than words. Show them what you can do, and even the most stubborn minds can change." Eleanor nodded, though she wasn't entirely convinced. Some minds seemed permanently closed to the idea of a female physician, regardless of her skill or training. Morning arrived with a flurry of activity. Eleanor chose her clothing carefully. A practical dark blue dress with a white collar, professional but not ostentatious. She pulled her chestnut hair into a severe bun and pinned her small physician's badge to her lapel. The mirror reflected back a woman of confidence and purpose, though her stomach churned with nerves. The hospital was a revelation. 2 stories of red brick with large windows to admit light and air. Inside, the floors gleamed with polish, and the walls were painted a clean, crisp white. It was nothing like the cramped, often dirty hospitals Eleanor had trained in back east. Dr. Hargrove was waiting in the main office, a tall man with iron-gray hair and a perpetual frown. Beside him stood 3 other men who comprised the hospital board, a banker, a retired judge, and the town pharmacist. "Gentlemen," Eleanor's father began, "may I present Dr. Eleanor Keller, graduate of the Women's Medical College of Pennsylvania, with honors in surgery and obstetrics." Dr. Hargrove's expression didn't change. "Miss Keller," he said, deliberately omitting her title, "I understand you've had some training. However, this hospital serves a community with traditional values. Our patients expect certain standards of care, which include treatment by qualified physicians." Eleanor bit back a sharp retort. "I assure you, Dr. Hargrove, my qualifications meet or exceed those required by this institution. I would be happy to provide references from my professors and supervising physicians in Philadelphia." "That won't be necessary," the banker interjected. "Your father's reputation speaks for itself, and the board has already voted to offer you a provisional position." Dr. Hargrove's scowl deepened. "Against my recommendation." 3 months, the judge explained. "A probationary period after which the board will evaluate your performance and make a final decision regarding permanent employment." It was better than Eleanor had expected. 3 months to prove herself, to show these men that medicine was about skill and knowledge, not gender. "I accept," she said firmly. "When may I begin?" "Today, if you're willing," the pharmacist replied. "We've had word of an accident at the Blackwood Ranch. One of the hands was thrown from a horse during braking, possible broken ribs, maybe worse." Eleanor felt a strange twist of fate in the assignment. Her first patient as a qualified doctor would come from the same ranch where she had watched Jackson die 5 years earlier. "I'll go immediately," she said, reaching for her medical bag. "Father, will you accompany me?" Dr. Thomas Keller shook his head. "Not this time, Ellie. This one is yours." As Eleanor rode toward the Blackwood Ranch, memories of that night 5 years ago swirled in her mind. She wondered if any of the hands would remember her, the doctor's daughter who couldn't save their friend. She wondered what the new owner, Caleb Blackwood, would make of a female doctor arriving to treat one of his men. Most of all, she wondered if she could honor the promise she had made to a dying cowboy, to live boldly, to not let anyone tell her what she couldn't do. The Blackwood Ranch loomed on the horizon, both a reminder of past failure and an opportunity to prove herself anew. The Blackwood Ranch had changed in the years since Eleanor's last visit. The once weathered buildings had been repaired and painted, the corrals expanded, and a new stable built along the eastern edge of the property. Even the main house looked different, larger, with a wide wraparound porch and glass windows that caught the afternoon sun. As Eleanor approached, she noticed men working in the corrals, breaking horses with a technique she didn't recognize, gentler than the brutal methods once employed under Matthew Blackwood's ownership. She reined in her horse at the hitching post near the main house, gathering her medical bag and straightening her collar before dismounting. A young boy of perhaps 12 spotted her arrival and ran toward the nearest corral, shouting something Eleanor couldn't quite make out. Moments later, a tall figure emerged from among the men and strode purposefully toward her. Eleanor's first impression of Caleb Blackwood was one of controlled power. Unlike his brother, who had carried his authority like a weapon, this man moved with the easy confidence of someone comfortable in his own skin. He was dressed practically in ranch clothes, though of finer quality than his hands would wear, and without the ostentation Matthew had favored. "Dr. Keller," he called as he approached, surprising Eleanor with his immediate recognition of her title. "Thank you for coming so quickly." Up close, she could see the family resemblance to Matthew, the same strong jawline and high cheekbones, but where the elder Blackwood's eyes had been cold and assessing, Caleb's were warm brown, crinkled at the corners as if he smiled often. "Mr. Blackwood," she replied, extending her hand professionally. "I understand one of your men has been injured." He took her hand briefly, his grip firm but not overpowering. "Caleb, please." And yes, Miguel Reyes was thrown while breaking a particularly stubborn Mustang. "We've moved him to the bunkhouse. This way." As they walked, Eleanor noted the efficient organization of the ranch, the logical layout of buildings, the well-maintained equipment, the absence of the disorder that had characterized Matthew's reign. Caleb Blackwood was clearly a different kind of rancher. "I must admit I was surprised when they said Dr. Keller was sending his daughter," Caleb said, though his tone held curiosity rather than criticism. "Then someone mentioned you'd gone east for medical training. Pennsylvania, was it?" "The Women's Medical College of Pennsylvania," Eleanor confirmed, waiting for the dismissive response such information typically elicited. Instead, Caleb nodded appreciatively. "Impressive. My late wife had considered applying there before." He trailed off, a shadow crossing his features. Well, before life took a different turn. Eleanor hadn't expected this revelation. "I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you. It's been 3 years now." He held the bunkhouse door open for her, adding quietly, "Catherine would have been pleased to see a woman doctor practicing in Ridgewater." The bunkhouse was cleaner than most Eleanor had visited, with individual bunks separated by simple partitions for privacy. At the far end, a man lay on a bed, his face contorted in pain as 2 fellow ranch hands attempted to make him comfortable. "Doctor's here, Miguel," Caleb announced, his voice gentling as he addressed the injured man. The ranch hands stepped back, making room for Eleanor. One of them, an older man with a weathered face and graying beard, narrowed his eyes. "You're the doctor?" he asked, skepticism heavy in his voice. Before Eleanor could respond, Caleb spoke. "This is Dr. Eleanor Keller. She trained at one of the finest medical colleges in the East. His tone left no room for argument. Dr. Keller, this is Hank Willis, my foreman. The authority in Caleb's voice was subtle but unmistakable. Hank nodded reluctantly and stepped aside, though his expression remained doubtful. Eleanor approached the injured man, setting her medical bag on a nearby stool. Miguel Reyes was young, perhaps 20, with the compact build of an experienced horseman. His breathing was shallow and rapid, indicating significant pain. "Señor Reyes," she said, switching to the Spanish she had learned during her training in Philadelphia's immigrant wards. "I'm Dr. Keller. Can you tell me what happened?" The young man's eyes widened in surprise at being addressed in his native language, then relaxed slightly. "The horse, he bucked when the train whistle blew. I landed on the fence, then the ground." Eleanor nodded, beginning her examination with gentle but professional efficiency. She carefully unbuttoned his shirt, revealing extensive bruising along his right side. Her fingers probed methodically, feeling for the telltale movement of broken ribs. "2 ribs broken, possibly 3, she murmured, switching back to English for the benefit of Caleb and the others, "and significant bruising to the kidney area." She looked up at Caleb. "I need to check for internal bleeding. It would be best if you and your men stepped outside." Hank snorted, but Caleb immediately gestured toward the door. "Of course, Doctor. We'll be right outside if you need anything." Once alone with her patient, Eleanor completed her examination, relieved to find no signs of the internal bleeding she had feared. The broken ribs were serious but clean breaks that would heal with time and rest. She set about binding his chest tightly enough to immobilize the ribs without restricting his breathing, explaining each step in Spanish. "You are fortunate, Señor Reyes," she said as she worked. "These will heal well if you follow my instructions. No riding or heavy lifting for at least 6 weeks." Miguel groaned. 6 weeks? El Patron will replace me." "No, he won't," Eleanor assured him, having taken the measure of Caleb Blackwood. "He strikes me as a man who values his workers." When she had finished treating Miguel, providing him with a tincture for pain, and detailed instructions for his recovery, Eleanor called the men back inside. She delivered her assessment and recommendations to Caleb directly, maintaining the professional demeanor she had practiced throughout medical school. "He'll need complete rest for at least 2 weeks, then very light duties for a month after that," she concluded. "I'd like to return in 3 days to check his progress." "Of course," Caleb agreed without hesitation. "Miguel, you'll continue to receive your wages during your recovery." He turned to Hank. "Move his things to the small cabin near the cookhouse. He'll be more comfortable there." The foreman nodded, clearly impressed despite himself with both Eleanor's competence and his employer's response. As Eleanor packed her medical bag, she noticed Miguel watching her with a curious expression. "Is there something else, Señor Reyes?" she asked. "You are the same señorita, yes? The one who was here years ago with the old doctor, when Jackson died?" Eleanor stilled, surprised that anyone remembered. "Yes, that was me." Miguel nodded solemnly. "Jackson was my friend. He taught me to rope when I first came here. He spoke of you, before the end." "He did?" Eleanor asked, her professional composure momentarily slipping. "See, he said an angel had come to guide him home, a healing angel with gentle hands." Miguel smiled slightly. "He was right about your hands, Doctora." Eleanor felt a tightness in her throat. "Thank you for telling me," she managed, quickly resuming her packing to hide the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. Outside, Caleb waited to escort her back to her horse. The afternoon sun had begun its descent, casting long shadows across the ranch yard. For a moment, neither spoke, the silence broken only by the distant sounds of cattle and men working. "You handled that well," Caleb said finally. Especially Hank. He's from the old school, doesn't adapt easily to change. I'm accustomed to skepticism, Mr. Blackwood. Caleb, he corrected gently. And I imagine you are. Change comes slowly to places like Ridgewater. He paused, seeming to consider his next words carefully. I understand you were here once before, during my brother's time. Eleanor nodded, wondering how much he knew about that night 5 years ago. Jackson Everett, Caleb said, confirming her unspoken question. I never met him, but when I took over the ranch, the men spoke highly of him. Said he was one of the best hands my brother ever employed. He was dying when I met him, Eleanor said quietly. A bullet wound that had become infected. There was nothing I could do except be there. Caleb studied her face. Sometimes that's the most important medicine, being there. The simple understanding in his words touched something in Eleanor. Most men dismiss the emotional aspects of healing, focusing only on the technical skills of diagnosis and treatment. Caleb Blackwood seemed to grasp what many experienced physicians did not, that medicine involved the soul as well as the body. Will you stay for dinner? He asked suddenly. The cook always prepares too much, and I'd welcome the company. Most of my conversation these days is about cattle prices and grazing rights. The invitation surprised Eleanor. Dining alone with an unmarried man would raise eyebrows in Ridgewater, particularly given her precarious professional position. I should return to town, she said reluctantly. My father will be expecting me, and I have rounds at the hospital this evening. Caleb nodded, accepting her refusal without offense. Another time, perhaps. When Miguel is feeling better, you must let me know what I owe you for your services. I'll have the hospital send a bill, Eleanor replied, though she knew she would likely reduce the fee considerably. The ranch hands' medical care often came from their meager wages. As she mounted her horse, Caleb held the reins briefly. Dr. Keller, he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. I hope Ridgewater appreciates what they have in you. If not, remember that Blackwood Ranch values competence over convention. The offer of alliance was clear, and Eleanor felt a surge of gratitude. Thank you, Mr. Blackwood. Caleb, he insisted once more, his smile reaching those warm brown eyes. As Eleanor rode back toward town, she found herself thinking not of Miguel Reyes or his injuries, but of Caleb Blackwood's unexpected support and the strange twists of fate that had brought her back to the ranch where everything had begun. News traveled quickly in Ridgewater. By the time Eleanor completed her evening rounds at the hospital, whispers of her successful treatment at the Blackwood Ranch had already reached town. Dr. Hargrove made no effort to hide his displeasure, assigning her the most mundane cases while taking the interesting surgical procedures for himself. Mrs. Peterson's bunions need examining in room 3, he said curtly, barely glancing up from his notes. And the Wilkinson boy has another ear infection. Eleanor bit back a retort. She had performed complex surgeries during her training, assisted with difficult births, treated gunshot wounds far worse than Miguel Reyes's broken ribs, but proving herself meant accepting these small humiliations with grace. Of course, Dr. Hargrove, she replied evenly. Later that evening, as she reviewed patient charts in the small office she shared with her father, Dr. Thomas Keller observed her with knowing eyes. Hargrove's testing you, he said, cleaning his spectacles with a handkerchief. He expects you to complain or refuse. I'm aware, Eleanor replied, not looking up from her notes. He'll have to try harder if he wants to drive me away. Her father chuckled. That's my girl. He hesitated, then added, I heard about your visit to Blackwood Ranch. The new owner seems to have made quite an impression. Eleanor felt a warmth creep into her cheeks. Mr. Blackwood was professional and respectful, which is more than I can say for some in this town. Caleb Blackwood is an interesting man, her father mused. Educated at Harvard, I believe, before his time in Texas. Could have been anything, lawyer, businessman, but chose ranching instead, especially after Catherine died. His wife? Eleanor asked, trying to sound merely professionally curious. Yes, tuberculosis, if I recall correctly. They were in Texas when it happened. Dr. Keller sighed. He came here afterward, taking over when Matthew passed. Made a lot of changes, most for the better. Eleanor thought of the clean bunkhouse, the well-maintained buildings, the gentler horse-breaking techniques, changes indeed. He's nothing like his brother, she observed. No, thank goodness. Matthew was difficult, old-fashioned in all the worst ways. Caleb has vision. Dr. Keller gave his daughter a sidelong glance. He asks about you occasionally, has done since he arrived. This revelation startled Eleanor. About me? Why? Jackson Everett, I imagine. The hands told stories about that night, how the doctor's daughter stayed with him till the end when most would have given up and gone home. He smiled gently. You made quite an impression yourself, Ellie. Eleanor thought of Miguel's words, a healing angel with gentle hands. The memory of that night remained sharp, untarnished by time. One night together, Those hours spent talking, listening, holding the hand of a dying man who faced his end with more courage than many showed in their entire lives. He requested me specifically today? She asked, putting the pieces together. Her father nodded. Sent word that he wanted Dr. Eleanor Keller, not her father or Dr. Hargrove. The next few days established a pattern. Mornings at the hospital, where Eleanor handled the cases Dr. Hargrove deemed beneath his dignity. Children with coughs, old men with joint pain, women with female complaints they wouldn't discuss with male physicians. Afternoons were spent making house calls throughout Ridgewater and the surrounding farms, building a reputation for thoroughness and compassion. 3 days after her first visit, Eleanor returned to Blackwood Ranch to check on Miguel Reyes. She found him resting comfortably in the small cabin, his ribs properly bound, following her instructions to the letter. The pain is better, Doctora, he reported as she examined him. I can breathe more deeply today. Excellent, she replied, pleased with his progress. Remember, no riding for at least 5 more weeks. El Patron has me sorting tack and mending harnesses, Miguel said. Light work, as you ordered. As Eleanor repacked her medical bag, a knock came at the cabin door. Caleb Blackwood entered, removing his hat in a gesture of respect. Dr. Keller, he greeted her. How is our patient? Recovering well, Eleanor replied, noting how the afternoon light caught in his dark hair, highlighting strands of auburn. Your compliance with my instructions has made a significant difference. I trust medical expertise when I see it, Caleb replied simply. After checking Miguel's bandages one final time and leaving instructions for continued care, Eleanor allowed Caleb to escort her outside. The ranch was quieter today, many of the hands out with the cattle on the north pasture. I was hoping you might reconsider my dinner invitation, Caleb said as they walked toward her horse. To discuss Miguel's ongoing treatment, of course. The professional pretext was transparent, but Eleanor appreciated the effort to maintain propriety. Still, she hesitated. Her reputation in Ridgewater was fragile enough without adding rumors of impropriety with Caleb Blackwood. Perhaps another time, she said, though with genuine regret. My father has arranged a dinner with the hospital board this evening, another attempt to convince Dr. Hargrove of my competence. Caleb's expression darkened slightly. Hargrove. That pompous fool tried to bleed my foreman last winter for a simple infection. If Hank hadn't sent for your father instead, he might have lost his arm. Dr. Hargrove follows traditional methods, Eleanor said diplomatically. Traditional doesn't always mean correct, Caleb countered. Medicine should progress just like any other field. He studied her face for a moment. You've encountered much resistance, I imagine. Some, Eleanor admitted, though less here than in Philadelphia. Small comfort, Caleb observed wryly. Listen, I have business in town tomorrow. Perhaps I could call on you at your father's house. Midday? I have a proposal that might interest you professionally. Eleanor's curiosity was piqued. A proposal? Nothing improper, I assure you, he said with a smile that transformed his serious face. Purely professional. Despite her better judgment, Eleanor agreed. I have appointments until 11, but I should be home by noon. The next day, Eleanor found herself watching the clock with embarrassing attentiveness. Her morning patients must have noticed her distraction, though she did her best to focus on their ailments. By 11:30, she had changed from her working clothes into a simple blue dress that her practical mind insisted was chosen for comfort, not to compliment her eyes. At precisely noon, Caleb Blackwood arrived at the Keller home dressed in a well-tailored suit rather than his ranch clothes. He carried a leather portfolio and wore an expression of businesslike determination that nonetheless softened when Eleanor opened the door. Dr. Keller, he greeted her formally, aware of the neighbors who might be watching. Thank you for seeing me. Eleanor invited him into the parlor, offering tea, which he politely declined. Her father was at the hospital, leaving them alone, a fact that would certainly fuel gossip if known. I'll come directly to the point, Caleb said, opening his portfolio and extracting several documents. I'm establishing a clinic at the ranch. A clinic? Eleanor repeated, surprised. For my ranch hands primarily, and the families who live on Blackwood land. He spread the papers on the small table between them, architectural drawings, supply lists, a proposed budget. Nothing elaborate, but properly equipped for basic medical care. The journey to town is long, and injuries or illness often go untreated longer than they should. Eleanor examined the plans with professional interest. The proposed clinic was well designed, with consideration given to light, ventilation, and practical needs. This is impressive, she admitted. But why are you showing me this? Caleb met her eyes directly. I want you to run it. 2 days a week to start. More if the need arises. The offer took Eleanor's breath away. A clinic of her own, without Dr. Hargrove's constant criticism and limitation. Patients who would come to her directly, rather than requesting the real doctor when they saw a woman. The ranch hands respect you after what you did for Miguel, Caleb continued, and he paused, choosing his words carefully. I believe in supporting merit wherever I find it. Dr. Hargrove would see this as a direct challenge to his authority, Eleanor warned, though the idea thrilled her. Dr. Hargrove doesn't own the medical care in this county, Caleb replied firmly, and I own my ranch. What happens there is my business, not his. Eleanor considered the proposal, turning it over in her mind. The opportunity was extraordinary. Freedom to practice medicine as she saw fit, to establish protocols based on modern methods rather than outdated traditions. But accepting would mean open conflict with Dr. Hargrove and possibly the hospital board. May I think about it? She asked finally. Of course, Caleb said, gathering his papers. The offer remains open. He hesitated, then added more softly, I think Jackson would approve, don't you? The mention of Jackson's name startled her. You seem to know a great deal about a man you never met. I make it my business to know about people who leave lasting impressions, Caleb replied. Jackson Everett clearly left one on you. The observation was uncomfortably perceptive. Eleanor rose, indicating their meeting was concluded. I'll give your proposal serious consideration, Mr. Blackwood. Caleb, he reminded her gently, standing as well. As he prepared to leave, he paused at the door. There's a social at the town hall this Saturday. I understand these gatherings are important for newcomers to establish themselves in the community. I'm hardly a newcomer, Eleanor pointed out, I grew up here. But Dr. Eleanor Keller is new to Ridgewater, he countered. Will you be attending? I hadn't planned to, she admitted. Town socials meant uncomfortable questions, disapproving glances, and the peculiar mix of curiosity and judgment that had followed her since her return. Consider it, Caleb suggested. Sometimes the best way to change minds is to be present. Besides, he added with the hint of a smile, I'd appreciate a friendly face. These events are excruciating when one doesn't dance. After he had gone, Eleanor remained in the parlor, considering the architectural plans he had left behind. A clinic at Blackwood Ranch, her clinic. The idea was both exhilarating and terrifying. The Ridgewater Town Social was held in the newly constructed Assembly Hall, a handsome building of red brick and white trim that stood as a testament to the town's growing prosperity. Eleanor had attended countless such gatherings in her youth, but never with the weight of professional scrutiny that now accompanied her every public appearance. You look lovely, her father commented as she descended the stairs in a simple but elegant gown of deep green. She had spent more time on her appearance than she cared to admit, telling herself it was merely professional necessity to present a polished image. I'm not sure this is wise, Eleanor said, smoothing invisible wrinkles from her skirt. Dr. Hargrove will be there, and he's already looking for reasons to discredit me. All the more reason to go, her father countered. Hiding away only reinforces the notion that you don't belong. Eleanor knew he was right. The same determination that had carried her through medical school wouldn't allow her to shrink from Ridgewater's judgment now. Besides, Caleb's proposal for the ranch clinic remained on her desk, a tantalizing possibility that both thrilled and frightened her. Before making her decision, she needed to understand her standing in the community. The assembly hall was crowded when they arrived, filled with the familiar faces of Eleanor's childhood, now older, some harder, but still the same people who had watched her grow from a curious girl into the woman she'd become. Conversations faltered as she entered, followed by a surge of whispers that made her chin lift automatically. Mayor Bennett approached immediately, his wife on his arm. Dr. Keller, and Dr. Keller. He greeted them with genuine warmth. We're delighted you could join us. Congratulations on your daughter's engagement, Mrs. Bennett, Eleanor said, nodding toward the young woman dancing with her fiancé across the room. I understand the wedding is planned for spring. Mrs. Bennett beamed, clearly pleased that Eleanor remembered. Yes, and we're hoping both Dr. Kellers will attend, the elder for social pleasure and the younger in case Martha faints again. She's developed quite the delicate constitution since her engagement. The simple inclusion, the assumption that Eleanor would be invited as a physician, not merely as her father's daughter, warmed her. Perhaps not everyone in Ridgewater shared Dr. Hargrove's resistance to female doctors. As her father was drawn into conversation with several older gentlemen, Eleanor found herself momentarily alone, observing the gathering from the edge of the dance floor. Dr. Hargrove stood with the wealthier merchants, pointedly ignoring her presence. Several young men glanced her way, but none approached. Her professional status had effectively removed her from consideration as a dance partner. Not dancing, Dr. Keller? The voice behind her belonged to Caleb Blackwood. When she turned, the sight of him in formal evening clothes nearly took her breath away. The well-tailored black suit emphasized his broad shoulders, and he had tamed his usually wind-blown hair for the occasion. I could ask you the same question, Mr. Blackwood, she replied, pleased that her voice remained steady. Caleb, he corrected automatically, and I believe I mentioned that I don't dance. Can't or won't? Eleanor asked, surprising herself with the teasing tone. Won't, he admitted with a slight smile, though Catherine tried to teach me. She said I move like a bear with a thorn in its paw. The mention of his late wife didn't dim his smile, Eleanor noticed. The grief was still there in his eyes, but tempered now with fond remembrance rather than raw pain. "Have you considered my proposal?" Caleb asked, changing the subject. "I have," Eleanor replied carefully. "It's a generous offer and one I'm inclined to accept, but I worry about the repercussions." Caleb's expression hardened as he followed her gaze to where Dr. Hargrove stood holding court. "Hargrove has too much influence in this town. Men like him resist change until it proves profitable, then claim they supported it all along." "That's remarkably cynical," Eleanor observed. "I prefer realistic," Caleb countered. "I've known men like Hargrove my entire life. They're why Catherine—" He stopped abruptly, then continued in a more controlled voice. "They're why many women don't receive proper medical care. Pride and tradition masquerading as wisdom." Before Eleanor could respond, Mrs. Bennett approached with a young woman in tow. "Dr. Keller, I hope you don't mind the interruption, but Miss Palmer has been hoping to speak with you. She's considering medical training herself." The girl couldn't have been more than 17, with earnest eyes and a determined set to her chin that reminded Eleanor of herself at that age. "Really?" she asked, immediately interested. "Yes, ma'am," Miss Palmer replied. "I've been reading medical texts from my uncle's library. He was a surgeon in Chicago before he passed." As Eleanor answered the girl's eager questions about medical training, she noticed several other young women drifting closer, listening with undisguised interest. By the time their conversation concluded, a small group had gathered, each with questions about education, opportunity, and Eleanor's experiences. "You've acquired quite the following," Caleb observed when the impromptu discussion finally dispersed. "I count at least 3 future doctors in that group. More likely their parents will discourage such improper ambitions," Eleanor replied, though she couldn't help feeling a spark of hope. Perhaps her presence in Ridgewater might make the path easier for girls like Miss Palmer. "I wouldn't be so certain," Caleb said. "Times are changing, even here." He glanced across the room to where Dr. Hargrove was watching their interaction with obvious disapproval, though some resist more stubbornly than others. As the evening progressed, Eleanor found herself the subject of curious scrutiny, but not the outright rejection she had feared. For every person who avoided her, another approached with genuine questions about modern medical practices, or more surprisingly, to share stories about her father's care for their families over the years. "You've made quite an impression," her father commented when they finally had a moment alone. "Though Hargrove looks like he's swallowed something unpleasant." "Let him choke on it," Eleanor replied with uncharacteristic bluntness, then immediately regretted her words. "I'm sorry, that was unprofessional." Her father chuckled. Sometimes unprofessional thoughts are the most honest ones. He nodded toward Caleb, who was engaged in conversation with the mayor. "Blackwood hasn't strayed far from your side all evening. People are noticing." "It's professional interest," Eleanor insisted, though she felt warmth creeping into her cheeks. "If you say so," her father replied, clearly unconvinced. "Just remember that in a town this size, every interaction is noted and discussed, especially between a beautiful young doctor and an eligible ranch owner." Before Eleanor could protest further, the town clerk rang a small bell, signaling the start of the evening's formal announcements. Mayor Bennett stepped forward, detailing the progress on the new schoolhouse and plans for expanding the railroad spur to accommodate increased cattle shipments. And finally, the mayor concluded, "I'm pleased to announce that the town council has approved funding for a new wing at our hospital dedicated to maternal and children's care. Dr. Hargrove will oversee the construction and—" "If I may, Mayor Bennett," Caleb interrupted, stepping forward. The crowd murmured in surprise. Interrupting the mayor's announcements was simply not done. "As the primary financial contributor to this project, I'd like to suggest that Dr. Eleanor Keller supervise the new wing." Her training at the Women's Medical College included specific focus on maternal care, making her uniquely qualified. The assembly hall fell silent. Eleanor stared at Caleb in shock, unable to believe what he had just done. Dr. Hargrove's face had turned an alarming shade of purple, while Mayor Bennett looked caught between surprise and curiosity. "That's highly irregular, Mr. Blackwood," Dr. Hargrove sputtered. "Dr. Keller, the younger, is still on probation at the hospital. A probation that seems designed to prevent her from demonstrating her full capabilities," Caleb replied smoothly. "Since my contribution represents 60% of the funding for this wing, I believe my recommendation carries some weight." The mayor, ever the diplomat, cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should discuss this at the next hospital board meeting rather than at a social gathering." "Of course," Caleb agreed, though his expression remained resolute. "I simply wanted my position known publicly. Transparency in civic matters is essential, wouldn't you agree, Dr. Hargrove?" The older physician made a non-committal noise and turned away, clearly fuming. Eleanor stood frozen, torn between professional excitement at the possibility and horror at Caleb's tactics. Using financial leverage to force her appointment would only reinforce the belief that she couldn't succeed on her own merits. As the gathering broke into smaller conversations, all clearly focused on the unexpected exchange, Caleb approached Eleanor. "I apologize for not consulting you first," he said quietly, "but the opportunity was too perfect to miss." "You've just made Dr. Hargrove my sworn enemy," Eleanor replied, struggling to keep her voice low, "and potentially undermined my professional standing." "People will say I succeeded only because of your intervention." Caleb's expression sobered. "They would have found reasons to dismiss your accomplishments regardless. At least this way, you'll have the chance to prove yourself." "On your terms, not mine," Eleanor countered, surprising herself with her anger. "I didn't ask for your assistance, Mr. Blackwood." "No," he acknowledged, his voice softening. "But would you have received the opportunity otherwise? Sometimes justice requires a catalyst." Eleanor wanted to argue further, but she knew he was right. Dr. Hargrove would never have considered her for such a position, regardless of her qualifications. Still, Caleb's intervention felt like a mixed blessing at best. "I should go," she said finally. "Thank you for your support, however unexpected." As she turned to leave, Caleb caught her hand gently. "Eleanor," he said, using her given name for the first time, "I believe in what you're trying to accomplish here, just as Jackson did." The mention of Jackson's name stopped her. "You can't know what he believed." "Can't I?" Caleb replied. "A man who asked for one night of your company when he knew he was dying, who spoke of you as a healing angel. I think he saw exactly what I see. A physician whose compassion equals her skill, and whose determination will change Ridgewater for the better." Eleanor withdrew her hand, unsettled by how accurately he had assessed her. "Good night, Mr. Blackwood." As she walked away, Eleanor felt the weight of dozens of curious stares. Whatever happened next, there would be no returning to the comfortable anonymity she had hoped for. Caleb Blackwood had seen to that. Word of Caleb Blackwood's announcement spread through Ridgewater like wildfire. By morning, Eleanor found herself the subject of widespread speculation, some admiring her apparent influence over the wealthy rancher, others questioning what she had done to secure such favor. Her father said nothing about the incident, but the slight tightening around his eyes suggested concern for the professional complications she now faced. Dr. Hargrove wasted no time making his displeasure known. When Eleanor arrived at the hospital, she found her patient assignments changed. The most difficult, unpleasant cases now hers, clearly intended to overwhelm or humiliate her. "Chambers' family has typhoid," he informed her curtly, handing over a stack of patient notes. "All 5 children. The parents refuse to leave their farm during harvest, so you'll need to ride out there. Daily visits, I should think. The Chambers farm was nearly 15 miles from town, over difficult terrain. Daily visits would consume hours, leaving little time for Eleanor's other patients. I'll begin immediately, she replied, refusing to show dismay. I assume the hospital can provide the necessary medicines? Dr. Hargrove's smile was cold. Our supplies are limited. You'll need to make do with what you can carry. He turned away, then added over his shoulder, unless, of course, you'd prefer to ask your benefactor for assistance. Eleanor swallowed her anger. This was punishment, pure and simple, but refusing the assignment would only confirm Hargrove's belief that she wasn't capable of handling difficult cases. The Chambers farm proved even more challenging than anticipated. The 5 children, ranging from 3 to 12 years old, were seriously ill, their mother exhausted from caring for them while their father struggled to bring in the harvest alone. Eleanor worked efficiently, setting up proper quarantine procedures, preparing medications, and teaching Mrs. Chambers how to manage the symptoms between visits. It was past sunset when she finally started the long ride back to town, her medical bag empty, her body aching with fatigue. As darkness fell, the trail became treacherous, forcing her to rely on her horse's instincts more than her own vision. When the animal suddenly stopped, ears pricked forward, Eleanor tensed. Bandits were known to target travelers on isolated roads, particularly after dark. "Who's there?" she called, one hand reaching for the small pistol her father had insisted she carry. "Dr. Keller," a familiar voice responded from the darkness ahead. Moments later, Caleb Blackwood emerged from the shadows, leading his horse. "I was on my way to find you. Your father was concerned when you didn't return by nightfall." Relief washed over Eleanor, followed immediately by irritation. "I'm perfectly capable of finding my way home, Mr. Blackwood." "Caleb," he corrected automatically, studying her face in the dim moonlight. "You look exhausted. The Chambers children?" "All 5 have typhoid," she confirmed, too tired to maintain her professional distance. "They should recover with proper care, but it will be a difficult few weeks." "And Hargrove assigned you to ride 15 miles daily to treat them?" Caleb's voice hardened. "After last night's events, I suspect." Eleanor didn't deny it. "Dr. Hargrove is testing my commitment." "He's punishing you," Caleb countered, "for something I did." The simple acknowledgement of responsibility surprised Eleanor. Most men would have defended their actions or dismissed her concerns. "Yes," she agreed, "though I suspect he would have found another reason eventually." They rode side by side in silence for several minutes, the steady rhythm of hoofbeats punctuating the night. Finally, Caleb spoke again. "I was wrong to speak without consulting you first," he said quietly. "I thought only of the opportunity, not of how my intervention might affect your standing." The apology was unexpected and disarming. Eleanor found her anger softening despite herself. "Your intentions were good," she conceded. "But I've spent years fighting to be judged on my own merits, not as someone's daughter or protege. Your announcement made me appear dependent on a man's favor once again." Caleb nodded thoughtfully. "I hadn't considered that perspective." He hesitated, then added, "Would you allow me to make amends?" "How?" Eleanor asked warily. "Let me provide transportation for your visits to the Chambers farm. One of my men can drive you in the ranch wagon, faster and safer than riding alone, and you'll arrive less fatigued." It was a practical solution that would make her daily journeys more manageable without undermining her professional authority. After a moment's consideration, Eleanor nodded. "That would be acceptable. Thank you." Caleb's relief was visible even in the moonlight. "And the clinic at the ranch? Have you decided?" "I'll do it," Eleanor replied, having made her decision during the long ride from the Chambers farm. 2 days a week as you proposed. But I insist on proper compensation, not a reduced rate because I'm a woman. I wouldn't have it any other way. Caleb agreed immediately. Equal pay for equal work. When they reached the outskirts of Ridgewater, Eleanor expected Caleb to bid her goodnight and return to his ranch. Instead, he accompanied her to her father's doorstep, dismounting to help her down from her horse, though she needed no assistance. "Dr. Keller," he said formally, aware of watching neighbors, "I hope you'll forgive my presumption at the social. It was never my intention to complicate your position here." "I believe you," Eleanor replied, surprised to find it was true. Whatever Caleb's faults, deception didn't appear to be among them. As she turned to enter the house, Caleb spoke again, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Jackson was right about you, you know. You do have healing hands." The words followed Eleanor inside, stirring memories she had tried to set aside. "One night together, that's all I ask." Jackson's final request had been so simple, yet it had changed the course of her life in ways she was only beginning to understand. The next morning brought a surprise visitor to the Keller home. Mayor Bennett arrived just as Eleanor was preparing to leave for the Chambers farm, his expression unusually solemn. "Dr. Keller," he greeted her, removing his hat. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all, Mayor," she replied, gesturing him inside, "though I must leave soon for a house call." "This won't take long," he assured her, settling into a chair in the parlor. "I wanted to speak with you privately about the hospital board's decision." Eleanor steeled herself for news that her probationary period had been terminated, that Dr. Hargrove had finally found a way to remove her entirely. "The board met this morning," Mayor Bennett continued, "to discuss Mr. Blackwood's suggestion about the new maternal wing. I understand if the board feels that Dr. Hargrove would be better suited," Eleanor began diplomatically. "Actually," the mayor interrupted, "the board voted in favor of your appointment." Eleanor stared at him in shock. "They did?" "With certain conditions," Mayor Bennett clarified. "You'll work under Dr. Hargrove's general supervision, but you'll have primary responsibility for the wing's design and eventual operation." "Dr. Hargrove agreed to this?" Eleanor couldn't keep the disbelief from her voice. The mayor's smile was wry. "Let's say he recognized the practical realities of the situation. Mr. Blackwood's financial contribution is significant, and several other donors indicated they shared his confidence in your abilities." He paused meaningfully. "Including my wife, who was most impressed by your conversation with young Miss Palmer at the social." Eleanor felt a surge of gratitude toward Mrs. Bennett, who clearly wielded more influence than she had realized. "Thank you for bringing me this news," she said sincerely. "I won't disappoint the board's trust." "I never thought you would," Mayor Bennett replied, rising to leave. "Ridgewater is changing, Dr. Keller, perhaps not as quickly as you might wish, but changing nonetheless." He retrieved his hat, adding casually, "By the way, I understand you'll be establishing a clinic at the Blackwood Ranch as well." News traveled quickly indeed. 2 days a week, Eleanor confirmed. "Excellent," the mayor nodded. "The town council sees this as a positive development. Medical care that reaches our outlying ranches and farms can only benefit the community as a whole." After Mayor Bennett departed, Eleanor stood in the parlor, absorbing the unexpected turn of events. Supervision by Dr. Hargrove would be challenging, but having responsibility for the maternal wing represented an opportunity she could never have imagined so early in her practice. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Outside stood a young ranch hand beside a well-maintained wagon bearing the Blackwood brand. "Dr. Keller?" he asked, touching his hat respectfully. "Mr. Blackwood sent me to drive you to the Chambers farm. I've brought fresh supplies from the ranch too, food for the family and some medicines Mr. Blackwood thought might be useful." The wagon was indeed loaded with provisions, far more than Eleanor had requested. She recognized Caleb's hand in this generosity, his way of supporting her work without interfering with her authority. As she climbed onto the wagon seat, Eleanor felt a strange mixture of emotions: gratitude for Caleb's practical assistance, wariness about his growing role in her professional life, and an uncomfortable awareness that her feelings toward the rancher were becoming increasingly complex. Autumn settled over Ridgewater, painting the surrounding hills in shades of gold and crimson. The Chambers children recovered slowly but steadily, their mother's grateful tears when Eleanor pronounced them out of danger, providing validation no medical diploma ever could. Dr. Hargrove continued his campaign of subtle resistance, but with the maternal wing's construction underway and her position there secured, Eleanor found herself less troubled by his disapproval. The clinic at Blackwood Ranch opened with little fanfare but immediate necessity. Eleanor converted a small building near the main house into a functional medical space, equipped with supplies Caleb had ordered from Denver and Chicago. Word spread quickly among the neighboring ranches and farms, and soon Eleanor found herself treating not only Blackwood hands but families from miles around who found the ranch clinic more accessible than the journey to town. 2 days each week, Eleanor rode to the ranch in the wagon Caleb continued to provide, returning home after sunset with the quiet satisfaction of work well done. The arrangement allowed her to practice medicine as she saw fit, without Dr. Hargrove's outdated constraints or skeptical oversight. "You seem happier," her father observed one evening as they shared a rare, quiet dinner. "The ranch clinic agrees with you." "It's liberating," Eleanor admitted, "to make medical decisions based on current knowledge rather than tradition." "And Blackwood?" her father asked carefully. "Does he interfere with your practice?" "Not at all," Eleanor replied truthfully. "He provides whatever I request, but otherwise keeps his distance." This wasn't entirely accurate. While Caleb never interfered with her medical decisions, he had developed a habit of appearing near the clinic as her day concluded, often inviting her to share supper before the journey home. These meals, taken in his study or on the porch when weather permitted, had evolved into discussions that ranged far beyond professional matters. Eleanor learned about his childhood in the East, his Harvard education, his decision to study agriculture and animal husbandry rather than law as his father had wished. He spoke of Catherine with a tenderness that stirred both admiration and an uncomfortable twinge of envy in Eleanor's heart. She would have made a fine doctor, he told her one evening, as they sat on the porch watching sunset paint the distant mountains. She had the mind for it, analytical but compassionate. Her father refused to consider it, of course. "What happened?" Eleanor asked softly. Caleb's expression darkened. "We were in Texas, establishing a new breeding program. The local doctor was traditional, believed women's ailments were best treated with rest and prayer." His hands tightened on the arms of his chair. "By the time I convinced her to see a specialist in Dallas, the tuberculosis was too advanced." The pain in his voice resonated with Eleanor's own experiences. How many women had she seen whose conditions worsened because male physicians dismissed their complaints or prescribed inadequate treatments? "That's why the maternal wing matters to you," she realized aloud. "Yes," Caleb acknowledged, "and why your work here matters. Catherine believed women deserved better medical care than most receive. Supporting your practice honors that belief." These conversations gradually revealed the man behind the successful rancher, thoughtful, principled, and haunted by past regrets. Eleanor found herself sharing her own experiences, the challenges of medical school, the professors who had tried to discourage her, the patients who had refused her care simply because of her gender. One rainy afternoon in late October, Eleanor arrived at the ranch to find an unexpected patient waiting. Miguel Reyes, fully recovered from his broken ribs, sat outside the clinic cradling a small bundle. "My sister's baby," he explained anxiously. She has fever, refuses milk since yesterday. The infant, a girl of perhaps 3 months, was indeed feverish, her tiny face flushed, her cries weak and intermittent. Eleanor worked quickly, examining the child thoroughly before diagnosing an ear infection. She prepared a mild herbal remedy for the fever and showed Miguel's sister, a young woman with exhausted eyes, how to administer the drops and soothe the baby's discomfort. "Return tomorrow," Eleanor instructed in Spanish. "The fever should reduce by morning, but I want to check her ears again." The grateful mother pressed Eleanor's hands between her own. "Gracias, doctora. The men say you are an angel of healing, like with Senor Jackson. Now I see they speak truth." The reference to Jackson caught Eleanor off guard. 5 years had passed since that night, yet his memory remained woven into the fabric of the ranch, his name still spoken with respect among the hands who had known him. After her patients departed, Eleanor found herself standing at the clinic window watching rain trace patterns down the glass, her thoughts drifting to that long-ago night. One night together, that's all I ask. Such a simple request that had altered the course of her life. "Difficult case?" Caleb's voice came from the doorway, startling her from her reverie. "No," Eleanor replied, composing herself. "Just an ear infection in an infant. She should recover quickly." Caleb studied her face with the perceptiveness that both unsettled and attracted her. "Something else is troubling you?" Eleanor hesitated, then decided on honesty. Miguel's sister mentioned Jackson. It brought back memories. Understanding softened Caleb's expression. "You still think of that night?" "Less often now," Eleanor admitted. "But yes, it was formative." "Tell me about him," Caleb said quietly. "Not the story everyone knows. The dying cowboy and the doctor's daughter. Tell me what you remember." The request surprised her. Men rarely showed interest in emotional experiences, preferring practical details and outcomes. Yet Caleb seemed genuinely curious about her memories, about the impact that night had left upon her. "He wasn't afraid," Eleanor said finally, moving away from the window to sit at her small desk. "In pain, yes, but not afraid. He talked about his life. Growing up in Kansas, losing his parents, drifting west until he found a place here. He asked about my dreams, why I wanted to become a doctor." "What did you tell him?" Caleb asked, leaning against the door frame, giving her space while remaining attentive. "That I wanted to help people who had no one else," Eleanor replied. "Women whose ailments were dismissed, children whose families couldn't afford proper care." She smiled faintly. "He said I had healing hands, that I shouldn't let anyone tell me what I couldn't do." "Wise man," Caleb observed. "Yes," Eleanor agreed, though I didn't fully appreciate his wisdom then. I was focused on my failure, that I couldn't save him, couldn't stop the infection. "Yet you stayed," Caleb said softly. "All night, holding the hand of a dying man you barely knew. Why?" The question struck at the heart of something Eleanor had never fully articulated, even to herself. "Because no one should die alone," she said finally. "Because he asked for one night, and it was the only thing I could give him." Caleb crossed the room slowly, coming to stand before her desk. "You gave him more than that, Eleanor. You gave him dignity in his final hours, the comfort of human connection when he needed it most." His voice dropped lower. "Some people live entire lifetimes without experiencing that kind of compassion." The intensity in his eyes made Eleanor's breath catch. For a moment, the small clinic seemed charged with unspoken possibility, the air between them heavy with something neither was prepared to name. The spell broke when hoofbeats sounded outside, announcing another patient's arrival. Caleb stepped back, his expression returning to polite professionalism. "I'll leave you to your work," he said. "But Eleanor..." He paused at the door, Thank you for sharing that memory. It helps me understand. Understand what? She asked. Why everyone who knew Jackson speaks of him with such respect, Caleb replied, and why you became the doctor you are today. As he departed, Eleanor found herself pondering his words. The night with Jackson had shaped her, certainly, reinforced her determination to practice medicine, to offer compassion alongside cure. But it had done something else too, something she had only recently begun to recognize. It had opened her heart to deeper connection, showing her that professional distance could coexist with genuine care. The realization was both liberating and terrifying, particularly when she considered her growing feelings for Caleb Blackwood, feelings that extended dangerously beyond professional respect or friendly regard. That evening, as they shared supper in his study, a comfortable silence settled between them. Rain drummed steadily on the roof and firelight cast dancing shadows across Caleb's features as he reviewed ranch accounts. Eleanor found her gaze lingering on his hands. Strong, capable hands that could gentle wild horses and manage complex business affairs with equal skill. "You're staring, Doctor," Caleb observed without looking up, though a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I was thinking about the maternal wing," she improvised. "The construction should be completed by spring." "Hargrove still giving you trouble about the design?" Caleb asked, setting aside his ledger. "Less than before," Eleanor admitted, "though he insists the recovery rooms are unnecessarily spacious. Because proper healing requires cramped quarters and poor ventilation," Caleb remarked dryly. Eleanor laughed, grateful for his understanding of her professional frustrations. Exactly his philosophy, it seems. As the evening drew to a close and she prepared to depart, Caleb surprised her by saying, "I'm riding into town tomorrow. Perhaps we could meet to discuss the additional equipment you requested for the clinic." The invitation was framed professionally, but Eleanor detected something more in his tone. "That would be acceptable," she replied carefully. "My afternoon appointments conclude at 4. "I'll call at your father's house at 5 then," Caleb said, helping her into the wagon that would return her to town. The following afternoon, Eleanor found herself checking the clock repeatedly as her final patient departed. 4:15. She had 45 minutes before Caleb would arrive at her father's house, just enough time to change from her practical work dress into something more suitable for a professional meeting, yet not so formal as to suggest she considered their discussion anything beyond business. She selected a deep blue dress that her father had insisted she purchase in Philadelphia. Stylish without being ostentatious, with a neckline modest enough for professional settings yet flattering to her complexion and eyes. As she fastened the small pearl buttons at her wrists, Eleanor chided herself for the unnecessary care she was taking with her appearance. This was a meeting about medical equipment, nothing more. Yet when Caleb arrived precisely at 5, his own appearance suggested similar care. His usual ranch attire replaced by a well-tailored suit, his hair neatly combed, his beard freshly trimmed. "Dr. Keller," he greeted her formally, aware of neighbors who might be watching. "I hope I'm not interrupting your evening." "Not at all, Mr. Blackwood," she replied, with equal formality. "Please come in." Her father was absent, having been called to a difficult berth at the Sullivan farm, leaving Eleanor and Caleb alone in the small parlor. The propriety of such a meeting would be questionable in Eastern society, but frontier practicalities often superseded social conventions. "I've brought the catalogs from Chicago," Caleb said, removing several thick volumes from his leather portfolio. "The surgical instruments you requested can be delivered within 3 weeks." They spent the next hour reviewing equipment options, their heads bent close together over illustrations of modern medical tools. Eleanor felt a growing excitement at the possibilities such instruments would provide. Procedures she had only been able to assist with during her training might now be performed at her own clinic. "These forceps," she said, indicating a particularly fine set, "and this speculum, both would be invaluable for obstetrical cases." Caleb made notes without question, adding the items to his growing list. "What about a proper examination table? The one you're using now was improvised from the ranch carpenter's workbench." "A proper table would be—" Eleanor hesitated, mental calculations of cost making her pause. "Necessary," Caleb finished firmly. "I'll order this model." He indicated an adjustable design featured prominently in the catalog. As their discussion of equipment concluded, Eleanor expected Caleb to take his leave. Instead, he hesitated, his expression suddenly less certain than she had ever seen it. "I've taken the liberty of arranging dinner at the hotel restaurant," he said carefully, "to continue our discussion of the clinic's future needs, if that would be acceptable to you." The invitation startled Eleanor. Dining together at the ranch, where their meetings could be construed as purely professional, was one thing. Being seen together at Ridgewater's only fine restaurant was quite another, a public declaration of association that would fuel gossip for weeks. Yet she found herself nodding. That would be acceptable, yes, though perhaps we should discuss the maternal wing rather than the ranch clinic, for appearance's sake. Caleb's smile suggested he understood her concern for professional reputation. "Of course, I'm particularly interested in your plans for training midwives. Catherine always believed traditional midwifery knowledge could complement modern medical practices." The mention of his late wife somehow made the dinner invitation feel less improper. This was not a romantic overture, but a continuation of his support for Catherine's unfulfilled vision. The Ridgewater Hotel restaurant was the town's finest establishment, with white tablecloths and crystal glassware that attempted to bring Eastern refinement to the frontier. As Eleanor entered on Caleb's arm, she felt the immediate hush of conversation, followed by the inevitable murmur of speculation. Dr. Hargrove sat at a corner table with several hospital board members, his expression darkening at their arrival. Eleanor squared her shoulders, determined not to let his disapproval affect her evening. Caleb had reserved a table near the window, positioned to allow conversation without the feeling of being on display. Still, Eleanor was acutely aware of the sideways glances and whispered comments from other diners. "Ignore them," Caleb advised quietly as he held her chair. "Their opinions are irrelevant to your work." "Easy for you to say," Eleanor replied with a small smile. "Your professional standing isn't determined by their approval." "Isn't it?" Caleb countered. "Ranching depends on community relationships as much as medicine does. The difference is that men aren't questioned when they exercise authority in traditionally male domains." The observation demonstrated an understanding of her challenges that few men possessed. As they dined, their conversation moved beyond professional matters to books they had read, places they had visited, ideas that shaped their respective worldviews. Eleanor found herself laughing more than she had in years, drawn in by Caleb's intelligent observations and unexpected humor. "I never expected a Harvard man to have such practical knowledge of cattle breeding," she remarked as they finished their meal. "And I never expected a Philadelphia-trained doctor to adapt so seamlessly to frontier medicine," Caleb returned. "We're both full of surprises, it seems." As they were preparing to leave, Dr. Hargrove approached their table, his smile thin and cold. "Dr. Keller, Mr. Blackwood, how cozy." The insinuation in his tone was unmistakable. Eleanor felt her cheeks warm but kept her expression professionally neutral. "Dr. Hargrove, we were just discussing the equipment needs for the maternal wing." "Indeed," Hargrove replied, skepticism evident. "I'm sure Mr. Blackwood's interest in maternal medicine is purely philanthropic." Before Eleanor could respond, Caleb rose to his full height, towering over the older physician. My interest, Dr. Hargrove, is in ensuring that no other woman dies from inadequate medical care as my wife did. His voice was low, but carried an intensity that silenced the nearby tables. If you find that motivation suspect, perhaps you should examine your own priorities. Hargrove paled slightly, clearly unprepared for such a direct confrontation. I meant no disrespect to your late wife, Mr. Blackwood. Then perhaps you should extend the same professional courtesy to Dr. Keller that you would to any physician, Caleb suggested, his tone deceptively mild, though his eyes remained hard. Her expertise in women's medicine is precisely why I support her work, both at the hospital and at my ranch. The exchange left Hargrove speechless, his usual condescension neutralized by Caleb's unflinching defense. With a curt nod, he retreated to his own table, where his companions seemed suddenly absorbed in their meals. As they left the restaurant, Eleanor felt a curious mixture of gratitude and discomfort. "Thank you for your support," she said carefully, "though I fear you may have made Dr. Hargrove an even more determined opponent." "Some men only understand direct confrontation," Caleb replied, helping her into her coat. "Hargrove has been undermining your position since you arrived. Sometimes a clear demonstration of alliance is necessary." Alliance. The word seemed insufficient for what had developed between them, yet Eleanor was reluctant to consider any deeper definition. Professional respect, mutual goals, friendship certainly, but anything more would complicate her hard-won independence. Outside, the November air carried the crisp promise of approaching winter. Stars pricked the black velvet sky, more brilliant than Eleanor had ever seen in Philadelphia. Caleb offered his arm for the short walk back to her father's house, and she accepted, telling herself it was merely practical in the dimly lit streets. "I've been thinking about Jackson again," Caleb said unexpectedly as they walked, "about his request to you that night." Eleanor glanced up, surprised by the sudden shift in conversation. "Why?" "Because I understand it better now," Caleb replied thoughtfully. "The need for human connection when facing the unknown. After Catherine died, I would have given anything for one more night together. Not for passion, but for presence. Just to have someone who saw me, who understood." The quiet vulnerability in his voice touched Eleanor deeply. That's what Jackson asked for. Not romance or physical comfort, just not being alone at the end. "And you gave him that gift," Caleb said softly. "Just as you give it to your patients now, seeing them as people, not just cases." They had reached her door, the porch light casting a warm glow that illuminated Caleb's face. In the soft light, Eleanor saw something in his expression she had been reluctant to acknowledge, a tenderness that went beyond professional admiration or friendly regard. "Eleanor," he said quietly, using her given name with an intimacy that made her breath catch. "I find myself wanting to ask for more than one night of your company, but I fear that would complicate the important work you're doing." The honesty of his admission left her momentarily speechless. This was no practiced courtship, no manipulation, but a man acknowledging his feelings while respecting her priorities. "It would complicate things," she agreed finally. "My position is still precarious. Any hint of impropriety would give Dr. Hargrove the ammunition he needs." "I understand," Caleb said, stepping back slightly. "Your work must come first. It's what Catherine would have admired most about you." As he prepared to leave, Eleanor made a decision that surprised even herself. "Mr. Blackwood, Caleb, perhaps we could continue our professional discussions, weekly, at the ranch clinic or here, as circumstances permit." The smile that illuminated his features confirmed she had understood his unspoken request. "I believe that would be entirely appropriate, Dr. Keller, for the benefit of our mutual medical endeavors." Winter descended upon Ridgewater with unforgiving intensity. Heavy snows isolated outlying farms and ranches, making Eleanor's journeys to the Blackwood Ranch increasingly treacherous. Still, she maintained her twice-weekly schedule at the clinic, often staying overnight in the small guest room Caleb had prepared adjacent to the main house when returning to town proved impossible. Their professional discussions continued, evolving into a ritual both looked forward to with barely concealed anticipation. In the evenings, they would sit before the fire in Caleb's study, reviewing medical journals he ordered from the East, debating treatment approaches, or simply talking about their respective days. These conversations, ostensibly professional, gradually revealed deeper layers of connection, shared values, complementary perspectives, mutual respect that had grown into something neither was prepared to name. The maternal wing at the hospital progressed steadily, despite Dr. Hargrove's continued resistance to Eleanor's more innovative design elements. Mayor Bennett proved an unexpected ally, consistently supporting her recommendations at board meetings and ensuring her authority over the project remained intact. "You've won over half the town," her father observed one evening as they reviewed patient notes together. "Even Mrs. Sullivan, who swore she'd never let a female doctor near her, has been singing your praises since you delivered her grandson." Eleanor smiled, though she knew better than to assume her position was secure. "And the other half still believes women should confine themselves to nursing at best." "That half is shrinking," Dr. Keller replied confidently, "though I notice Caleb Blackwood's support hasn't hurt your cause." Eleanor chose not to respond to the gentle teasing in her father's tone. Whatever was developing between her and Caleb remained undefined, existing in a careful space between professional collaboration and personal attachment. To acknowledge it more directly would force decisions neither was ready to make. In late January, a blizzard struck without warning, transforming the landscape into a treacherous expanse of blinding white. Eleanor had been at the ranch clinic since morning, treating a succession of minor ailments among the hands and their families. As afternoon faded into early evening, Hank Willis, the foreman, burst into the clinic, his face rigid with concern. "It's the boss," he said without preamble. "Horse slipped on ice near the north pasture. He's conscious but can't move his right arm. Boys are bringing him in now." Eleanor's heart clenched with fear, but her medical training took over immediately. "Prepare the examination table," she instructed, gathering supplies with practiced efficiency, "and heat water. I'll need to clean any wounds before assessment." When they carried Caleb in, his face was ashen beneath his weathered tan, his right shoulder clearly dislocated. Pain lines etched his features, though he managed a strained smile when he saw Eleanor. "Seems I've become your patient, doctor," he said through gritted teeth. "So it seems," Eleanor replied, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "Let's get your coat off and see what we're dealing with." The men helped ease Caleb onto the examination table, carefully removing his coat and shirt to reveal the damage. Eleanor assessed the injury with professional detachment, forcing herself to see the dislocated shoulder and extensive bruising as medical conditions rather than injuries to a man who had come to mean far more to her than she had been willing to admit. "Posterior dislocation," she diagnosed, her fingers gently probing the misaligned joint. "Clean, fortunately. No fractures that I can detect, though the soft tissue damage is significant." Caleb's eyes never left her face as she worked, studying her with an intensity that might have unnerved her under different circumstances. "What's the treatment, doctor?" "I need to reduce the dislocation," Eleanor explained. "It will be painful, but brief. Then immobilization for several weeks while the tissues heal." She turned to Hank and the others. "I'll need assistance. Mr. Willis, please stand here and brace his torso. Miguel, you'll help me with the reduction itself." As the men positioned themselves, Eleanor leaned close to Caleb, speaking softly so only he could hear. "This will hurt badly, but I promise it will be quick. Trust me." Something in Caleb's expression shifted at her words, vulnerability beneath the stoic mask he presented to his men. "I do trust you, Eleanor. Completely." The reduction required precise manipulation and considerable strength. Eleanor directed Miguel carefully, demonstrating the exact angle and pressure needed while she monitored Caleb's pulse and breathing. When the joint finally slid back into place with an audible click, Caleb's strangled groan echoed through the small clinic. "It's done," Eleanor assured him, immediately preparing a sling to immobilize the injured shoulder. "The worst is over." After bandaging the shoulder and administering a mild sedative for the pain, Eleanor dismissed the ranch hands, assuring them their employer would recover fully with proper rest and care. When they had gone, she found herself alone with Caleb for the first time since his injury. "You have remarkable hands," he said quietly, the sedative softening his usually controlled demeanor. "Strong when needed, gentle when it matters most." Eleanor busied herself cleaning her instruments, uncomfortable with the emotion his words stirred. "Professional training," she replied lightly. "Nothing remarkable." "No," Caleb disagreed. "It's more than training. It's who you are." He watched her movements with hazy concentration. "Jackson was right about you." The mention of Jackson's name in this context, Caleb injured and vulnerable, Eleanor providing care, created a strange symmetry that wasn't lost on either of them. The parallel hung in the air between them, unspoken but undeniable. "You should rest," Eleanor said finally, helping him from the examination table. "I've prepared a dose of laudanum if the pain becomes unbearable tonight." "Will you stay?" Caleb asked, his uninjured hand catching hers. "The blizzard makes travel impossible, and I—" He hesitated, then continued with uncharacteristic openness. "I don't want to be alone tonight." The echo of Jackson's request 5 years earlier sent a jolt through Eleanor. One night together, that's all I ask. Different circumstances, different man, yet connected by an invisible thread of shared understanding. "I'll stay," she replied softly. "As your physician." Caleb's smile held a hint of his usual perception. Of course, purely professional. That night, as the blizzard howled around the ranch house, Eleanor sat beside Caleb's bed in a comfortable chair, monitoring his condition while he drifted in and out of sedative-induced sleep. In his more lucid moments, their conversation wandered through memories and reflections rarely shared in the light of day. "I never told you why I came to Ridgewater," Caleb said during one such interval, his voice low in the lamplit darkness. "It wasn't just Matthew's death that brought me here." Eleanor looked up from the medical journal she had been pretending to read. "What was it then?" "Jackson Everett," Caleb replied, surprising her completely. Or rather, the story of Jackson and the doctor's daughter who stayed with him through his final night. "I don't understand," Eleanor said, setting aside her book. "How did you hear that story in Texas?" Caleb shifted slightly, wincing as the movement jarred his injured shoulder. "After Catherine died, I was lost. Angry at the medical establishment that had failed her, angry at myself for not finding better care sooner." His eyes held Eleanor's in the dim light. "I traveled aimlessly for months, eventually finding work at a ranch outside Dallas. There I met a hand named Thomas Reyes." "Miguel's cousin?" Eleanor realized, the pieces falling into place. "Yes," Caleb confirmed. "He told me about his cousin working at Blackwood Ranch in Montana Territory, about a cowboy named Jackson who died there, and the young woman who showed him compassion when medicine could offer no cure." His voice softened. "The story stayed with me. When I learned my brother had died and the ranch needed a new owner, it seemed like Providence." Eleanor struggled to absorb this revelation. "You came here because of a story about Jackson's death?" I came here because of a story about healing that transcended medicine, Caleb corrected gently. About a woman who understood that sometimes presence is the most profound treatment we can offer. He reached for her hand with his uninjured one. I came looking for that kind of healing, though I didn't know it then. The confession left Eleanor speechless. All this time, she had believed their meeting was coincidence, their connection a gradual development of shared interests and values. Instead, Jackson's memory had drawn Caleb to Ridgewater, to the ranch, to her. Morning arrived with blinding brilliance, sunlight reflecting off the snow-covered landscape in a dazzling display that belied the night's ferocity. Eleanor woke in the chair beside Caleb's bed, her neck stiff from the awkward position, to find him watching her with an expression that made her heart quicken. "You stayed," he said simply. "I'm your doctor," she replied, though both knew her presence through the night transcended professional obligation. In the clear light of day, Caleb's revelation demanded further discussion, yet neither seemed eager to break the fragile understanding that had developed during those quiet nighttime hours. "I should check your shoulder," Eleanor said, rising to retrieve fresh bandages. Caleb submitted to her examination with patient dignity, wincing only slightly as she tested the joint's stability. "Your professional opinion, doctor?" "The reduction was successful," Eleanor confirmed, rewrapping the shoulder with practiced hands. "But you'll need to keep it immobilized for at least 3 weeks. No riding, no ranch work." "An impossible prescription for a rancher in winter," Caleb observed wryly. "Nevertheless, my prescription stands," Eleanor replied firmly, "unless you'd prefer the alternative, permanent weakness and recurrent dislocations." His smile held equal parts amusement and admiration. "Has anyone ever told you that you can be quite formidable when delivering medical orders?" "Frequently," Eleanor admitted, returning his smile despite herself. "It seems to be a necessary quality for a female physician." The blizzard's aftermath kept Eleanor at the ranch for 3 days, the roads to town impassable until the worst drifts were cleared. She divided her time between treating the minor ailments and injuries, typical of harsh winter conditions, and monitoring Caleb's recovery. Their conversations during this enforced proximity grew increasingly personal, the professional veneer that had protected them both gradually wearing thin. On the third evening, as they sat before the fire in his study, Caleb finally addressed what had remained unspoken since his sedative-induced confession. "Do you regret it?" he asked quietly. "That night with Jackson?" Eleanor considered the question carefully. "No," she said finally. "I regretted not being able to save him, of course. But staying with him, being present through his final hours, I've never regretted that." "It changed you," Caleb observed. "Yes," Eleanor acknowledged. "It showed me that medicine isn't just about cures and treatments. It's about seeing people at their most vulnerable and offering whatever comfort we can, even when healing isn't possible." She met his gaze directly. "In many ways, that night made me the doctor I am today." "And the woman you are today?" Caleb asked, the question gentle but penetrating. Eleanor felt a flush rise to her cheeks. "That too, perhaps. It taught me that human connection matters, especially, when it's difficult or painful." Caleb nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Catherine used to say that true healing happens in the spaces between medical interventions, in the moments of genuine human contact." "She sounds like a remarkable woman," Eleanor said softly. "She was," Caleb agreed. "And she would have admired you greatly, Eleanor. Not just your medical skill, but your courage in claiming a place traditionally denied to women." The compliment warmed her, not least because it acknowledged both aspects of her identity, the physician and the woman, without diminishing either. When the roads finally cleared, Eleanor returned to Ridgewater to find unexpected news waiting. Dr. Hargrove had submitted his resignation to the hospital board, citing his intention to establish a practice in Helena where his traditional methods would be properly appreciated. "It seems your success became impossible for him to ignore," her father explained as they reviewed patient files together. "The maternal wing's popularity in particular proved his undoing. Even his most steadfast supporters have wives or daughters who prefer your care." "And the board?" Eleanor asked cautiously. "Will they seek another male physician to replace him?" Dr. Thomas Keller smiled. "They've offered you his position, Ellie. Full privileges, equal salary, and primary responsibility for the maternal wing you designed." The news was almost too extraordinary to absorb. After months of proving herself, of enduring Hargrove's attempts to undermine her authority, the professional recognition she had fought for was finally within reach. Spring arrived in a rush of melting snow and greening hills. The maternal wing opened with a ceremony attended by most of Ridgewater's residents, many of whom had contributed to its construction. Eleanor stood beside Mayor Bennett as he cut the ribbon, her heart full at the sight of the modern facility that would serve generations of women and children. Caleb attended the ceremony, his shoulder fully healed, his presence drawing curious glances from those still speculating about the nature of his relationship with the town's female doctor. Their professional discussions had continued through the winter months, evolving into something neither could pretend was purely business. Yet both had maintained the careful distance necessary to protect Eleanor's hard-won professional standing. Until now. As the crowd dispersed following the ceremony, Caleb approached Eleanor where she stood examining the new surgical suite with justifiable pride. "Dr. Keller," he greeted her formally, though his eyes held a warmth reserved for her alone. "You've accomplished something remarkable here." "Not alone," Eleanor replied, acknowledging his significant financial contribution with a grateful smile. "Without your support, this wing might never have existed." "Without your vision, it certainly wouldn't have," Caleb countered. He hesitated, then continued in a lower voice. "I was hoping we might discuss another matter, a personal one this time." Eleanor felt her pulse quicken. "Oh?" "I've purchased the old Morrison property adjacent to town," Caleb said. "A convenient location for a man who finds himself with increasingly frequent business in Ridgewater." The implications of this statement, that Caleb intended to divide his time between the ranch and town, that his reasons for doing so were personal rather than professional, sent a flutter of anticipation through Eleanor's chest. "That seems practical," she managed, aware of her father watching them from across the room with poorly disguised interest. "I thought so," Caleb agreed, his expression serious, though his eyes held a hint of amusement. "Particularly since I find myself wanting to request more than occasional evenings of your company." The echo of Jackson's request, one night together, resonated between them, a reminder of the connection that had drawn them to each other, the shared understanding of what it meant to offer presence and compassion when it mattered most. "And if I were amenable to such a request?" Eleanor asked carefully. "Then I would hope you might consider a more permanent arrangement," Caleb replied, his voice steady, despite the significance of his words. "One that would allow me to support your work while sharing your life." Eleanor studied his face, the warmth in his eyes, the strength and kindness that had first drawn her to him, the respect that had never wavered despite society's skepticism about her chosen path. "I would need to maintain my practice," she said, her practical nature asserting itself even as her heart raced. "My patients depend on me." "I would expect nothing less," Caleb assured her. "Your healing hands are too valuable to be confined to one household." As the sun streamed through the windows of the wing she had designed, Eleanor thought of the journey that had led her here, from that night with a dying cowboy whose simple request had changed the course of her life, to this moment with a man who understood and valued both her professional calling and her personal worth. "In that case," she said softly, "I believe we have much to discuss, Mr. Blackwood." "Caleb," he corrected gently, offering his arm as they walked toward the future neither could have imagined 6 months earlier, a future built on the foundation of one night that had transformed 2 lives and now promised to transform a third.